Do you know how to use one of these?
GoldenEye. Load a rumble pack and see how it feels when 007 meets N64.
So I've recently been on a James Bond kick again and recently rewatched almost all of the movies by going in Ian Fleming's book release order just for something different. I also decided to whip out the old Nintendo 64 and play some classic GoldenEye 2, which sparked the idea for me to make this video. If you don't know, this channel started with me only talking about James Bond video games, and then I went on to Pokemon from there. So I actually already have a video where I talked about GoldenEye. But, I don't know. I think a lot of YouTubers can relate to this, but I recently rewatched a couple of those older videos and yeah, they're pretty rough. It was a learning phase and my audio really was pretty bad. The era of classic Bond games have come to an end. From here on out, almost every game is a first or third person shooter with a couple exceptions. I've been doing this channel for almost 5 years now and naturally, some things have improved since then. So I wanted to make this one-off revisit of the most important game in the 007 video game series. Aside from the game itself, I'm going to be talking about a handful of stuff like a very brief Bond history summary, where the game series was at this point, where video gaming was at this point, my personal history with the game, and of course, the plot of the movie GoldenEye that it's based on. I'll have timestamps for all of this in the description if you are only interested in a select few topics. Welcome to my much more thorough revisit of GoldenEye 007. But all of this started way back in the early 1950s. Author Ian Fleming created the character of suave British secret agent James Bond in 1953 for his first novel, Casino Royale. Ian Fleming went on to write 12 novels and 2 short story collections about Agent 007 until his death in 1964. His 5th novel, From Russia with Love, was apparently a favorite book of President John F. Kennedy, which is what helped to bring Bond into mainstream pop culture and sparked the film series that we all know today. The first film, Dr. No, was released in 1962 featuring Scottish actor Sean Connery in the role of 007. He continued on to play the role in From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, and Thunderball before quitting after the release of You Only Live Twice in 1967. Enter Australian actor George Lazenby, who took the reins for 1969's On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which ended up being a one-off for him. Sean Connery returned one more time for Diamonds Are Forever in 1971, before actually putting the main series behind him for good. Then, from 1973 to 1985, the series actually had its first English actor in the role, with Roger Moore, who played Bond for 7 total films. Live and Let Die, The Man with the Golden Gun, The Spy Who Loved Me, Moonraker, For Your Eyes Only, Octopussy, and A View to a Kill. By 1985, Roger Moore was simply getting too old to keep playing the part. Enter British actor Timothy Dalton, who played the role for 2 films in 1987's The Living Daylights and 1989's License to Kill. But adjusted for inflation, License to Kill is, to this day, the Bond film that performed the worst in the box office, which kinda put the series on a bit of a hiatus for 6 more years. After so much time had passed, Timothy Dalton was pretty much done with waiting around. Before Dalton was cast though, the producers actually wanted Irish actor Pierce Brosnan to be James Bond, but there were some conflicting issues with his contract on his show, Remington Steele. But with nothing working out for Dalton's 3rd film, Pierce Brosnan was eventually offered the part, and the series was revitalized in 1995 with the release of GoldenEye. As the 17th official James Bond film, GoldenEye was directed by Martin Campbell and stars Pierce Brosnan, Sean Bean, Isabella Scorupco, Famke Janssen, Alan Cumming, Robbie Coltrane, and Joe Don Baker. There were some new faces in the recurring roles of M and Moneypenny, with Dame Judi Dench as the head of MI6 and Bond's boss, M, and Samantha Bond as Moneypenny, M's secretary. Desmond Llewellyn remained in the role of Q, MI6's quartermaster in charge of technology, vehicles, and gadgets, a role that he'd had since 1963. As this was the first Bond film after the end of the Soviet Union in the Cold War, that became integrated into the plot. And just as a forewarning, there will absolutely be full spoilers for the movie here, as I want to go over the entire thing. So again, skip to here if you don't want the entire plot of GoldenEye spoiled for you. The film opens with an unidentified man running across the top of a dam in the Soviet Union before he bungee jumps off of it, entering into a chemical weapons facility. We soon discover that this man is James Bond, Agent 007, played by Pierce Brosnan. Here, he meets up with fellow MI6 Agent 006, Alec Trevelyan, played by Sean Bean. It isn't long before Alec is captured at gunpoint by Soviet soldiers, led by Colonel Arkady Grigorovich Ourumov, played by Gottfried John. Ourumov shoots 006 in front of Bond, and Bond escapes the facility and the area by diving off of a cliff on a motorcycle into a falling plane. You know, Bond stuff. Enter the title sequence here, with the title track being sung by Tina Turner and written by Bono and The Edge. It's not really one of my favorites, but it does kind of get into my head sometimes. It has some cool imagery here too. 9 years later, now in 1995, Bond is driving around the mountains of Monaco with a psychologist and gets into a friendly car chase with a beautiful woman who just happened to be driving nearby. He soon meets this woman at a nearby casino and learns that her name is Xenia Onatop, played by Famke Janssen. After briefly observing her, Moneypenny notifies Bond via radio transmitter that Xenia is part of a crime syndicate known as Yanis. We then see Xenia seducing and murdering a naval admiral by crushing him with her thighs. The next day, Bond investigates and finds the admiral's body. At this time, at a nearby frigate, there is a demonstration occurring to unveil a new military helicopter that is capable of withstanding electromagnetic shocks. Xenia and newly promoted General Ourumov soon adopt it as their own. The film then cuts to a satellite control center at Severnaya in Siberia, where we meet two programmers, Natalia Semenyova, played by Isabella Skorupko, and Boris Grushenko, played by Alan Cumming. After some wacky password riddles between Boris and Natalia, Boris goes outside for a cigarette. Xenia and Ourumov arrive in their stolen helicopter. Ourumov instantly orders an unscheduled test of a new weapon system called the GoldenEye, before Xenia straight up guns down everybody in the control center, except for Natalia, who had been hiding in the kitchen. Ourumov and Xenia activate the GoldenEye, destroying all of the equipment in the control center. Unbeknownst to them, Natalia survives, and Ourumov and Xenia escape in the unaffected helicopter. MI6 learns about this disaster and confirms that it was an EMP blast, or electromagnetic pulse. Through live satellite imaging, Bond notices the lone survivor walking around. After M briefs Bond on General Ourumov, she sends Bond to St. Petersburg to investigate Ourumov, the GoldenEye, the survivor, and the Yanis crime syndicate. After some usual hijinks in the Q lab, Bond acquires a laser watch, a belt with a cable, a grenade pen, and his new car, a BMW Z3. In St. Petersburg, Ourumov meets with Defense Minister Mishkin to discuss what had happened in Severnaya, where he learns that there were two survivors. Boris, which he knew of, but we did not, and Natalia, which we knew, but he did not. He said he will look into this, still hiding the fact that he is betraying everybody. Natalia makes her way to St. Petersburg, where she is able to get in contact with Boris, planning to meet with him. But Boris betrays her, and she is captured by Xenia. Bond meets up with his CIA contact Jack Wade, played by Joe Don Baker, where he learns that the only person who would know about Yanis is ex-KGB agent Valentin Zukovsky, played by Robbie Coltrane. You know, Rubeus Hagrid. Bond has a rough history with Valentin after wounding him and taking his girlfriend, but he goes to meet with him anyway. After Valentin almost shoots Bond in the groin area, Valentin agrees to give Bond some information. The leader of Yanis is a child of Alain's Cossack parents, who were betrayed by the British government and executed by Stalin after being handed back to the USSR. Valentin helps to set Bond up with a meeting with Yanis. At a hotel, Bond is soon attacked by Xenia, who tries to kill him with, of course, her thighs. At gunpoint, Bond has Xenia take him to meet the leader of Yanis at an old statue park of discarded Soviet statues. Bond soon meets the leader of Yanis, Alec Trevelyan, who was in fact not killed by Ourumov, as it was all a setup. Alec was left scarred in the facility explosion as Bond changed the timers at the last second. Alec wants to get revenge on MI6 for his parents, and Bond for causing his face to be deformed. He tells Bond that his parents weren't actually killed by Stalin, but took their own lives out of shame. Bond is soon knocked out by a tranquilizer dart and awakens to find himself and Natalia tied down inside of the stolen helicopter, which is soon programmed to fire rockets onto itself. At the last second, Bond activates the ejector seats, barely surviving the explosion, and they are soon taken into custody by Russian military. Bond realizes Natalia was innocent of the whole Severnaya attack, but they are threatened to be executed by Defense Minister Mishkin. Bond tries to convince him that Ourumov betrayed them and that he stole the GoldenEye. Ourumov soon enters and murders Mishkin to try and frame Bond, but Bond and Natalia escape into the archives. Natalia is eventually captured by Ourumov, and Bond gives chase through the streets of St. Petersburg in a tank, causing an absolute ton of destruction. They eventually end up at a train yard where Bond uses the tank to try and derail the train, which has Ourumov, Natalia, Xenia, and Trevelyan inside. In a tense standoff, Bond tries to convince Ourumov that Alec will betray him, as Ourumov has Natalia at gunpoint. With a choice to shoot either Alec or Ourumov, Bond shoots Ourumov to save Natalia, as Alec and Xenia escape. Bond and Natalia narrowly escape the train from a bomb Alec set just before Natalia is able to track Boris's location in Cuba. Bond and Natalia travel to Cuba where they meet up with Jack Wade, who tells them that they have never found a giant satellite there and that it can't exist, much to the protest of Natalia. Bond trades his car to Wade for a small train, and as the two of them fly over a lake looking for the satellite, a missile shoots out from inside the lake, causing their plane to crash. Bond awakens to Xenia rappelling down from a helicopter to kill him for good. Just before Xenia squeezes him to death with her legs, he reattaches her harness cord, shoots down the helicopter with her own rifle, which causes her to be slammed between two tree branches, killing her. She always did enjoy a good squeeze. The lake is soon completely drained where a giant satellite dish emerges. How this was possibly built with nobody knowing is beyond me. In the control center below, though, Alec and Boris plan on using the GoldenEye on London to cause nationwide chaos and destroy any electronic records, all while stealing bank money beforehand. Bond and Natalia separate as he plans to plant explosive charges while she tries to reprogram the GoldenEye. Bond and Natalia get captured again, and Boris accidentally picks up Bond's grenade pen. Boris nervously tries to break Natalia's computer reprogramming codes, all while clicking the grenade pen on repeat. 3 clicks activates the detonator, 3 more deactivates it. Bond finds the opportune moment to kick the pen away as it explodes, destroying fuel canisters, allowing he and Natalia to escape. Boris survives and continues to attempt to break Natalia's codes, so Bond goes to destroy the satellite antenna for good. Alec heads out to stop Bond from destroying the antenna as the two get into a gun and fist fight. Bond is able to jam the antenna's gears, angering Boris, who sets the satellite to crash to the Earth. In a tense fight at the very bottom of the antenna, Alec is just about to kill Bond when a helicopter appears with Natalia having the pilot at gunpoint. This distracts Alec, causing Bond to headbutt him off of the ladder. Bond catches him at the last second before coldly telling him that he is going to drop him to his death for him, not for England, as he does so. Alex survives the fall and Bond escapes by jumping onto the helicopter. The jammed antenna causes an explosion, sending the entire mechanism to fall right onto Alec, killing him for good. In all of the control center's explosions, Boris somehow narrowly survives just before liquid nitrogen tanks explode, instantly freezing him to death. The film ends with the helicopter pilot dropping off Bond and Natalia in a nearby field, unknowingly surrounded by US Marines, as credits roll to a very underwhelming song by Eric Serra. And that is the entirety of GoldenEye, which was able to give the franchise a burst of revitalized energy that it needed. Everything about it felt so much more modern than License to Kill did. I do really like License to Kill, but GoldenEye is the first in the new era. Adjusted for inflation, GoldenEye performed the 10th best in the series in the box office, and the best of the 4 Pierce Brosnan Bond films. It is largely considered to be his best as well, and I absolutely agree with that. Brosnan continued the role of 007 in Tomorrow Never Dies in 1997, The World Is Not Enough in 1999, and finally Die Another Day in 2002, before the series was rebooted with Daniel Craig in 2006. But by this point, GoldenEye was among the greats in the entire series. It's hard to say, but it's probably my favorite up to this point, right up there with On Her Majesty's Secret Service and For Your Eyes Only. It was really cool to see another 00 agent be so integral into the plot, even though he ended up being the main villain, so it really felt personal to Bond. But I think all the characters are great, the performances are great, which isn't always the case, and I think Pierce Brosnan nailed it in his first go-around. It's a great Bond film. Many critics and audiences loved it too, and it really felt like Bond was back. It gets a high recommendation from me. Which brings me to the video game series. Again, I have already talked about every single one of these, so go check out those if you want to hear all of my individual thoughts. I also made a supercut of every video into one long retrospective. But basically, Bond games started all the way back in 1982, spawning off a bunch of early 80s computer games. These were all pretty primitive, but cool to see the time capsule of what computer gaming was like. James Bond 007 was the first real main game for the Atari 2600, Commodore 64, ColecoVision, etc. There were also some games based on older films, like a text-based only game for Goldfinger, a boat racing game for Live and Let Die, and a vehicle driving game for The Spy Who Loved Me. But alongside these, there were movie tie-in releases to coincide with each new release, and this trend would continue up until Die Another Day in 2002. 1985 had two versions of A View to a Kill, the same year that film came out. The Living Daylights had a computer game that same year in 1987, and License to Kill did as well in 1989. But also, there was only so much you could do with computer gaming in the mid-80s, so they are all absolutely products of their times. With Nintendo storming onto the scene in the mid-80s with the Famicom and NES, home console gaming was now a mainstream thing. But not counting James Bond 007 for the Atari, the Bond series wouldn't get its first home console game until 1992 with James Bond Jr. for the NES and SNES, a game made for the spin-off animated cartoon that follows James Bond's nephew. Yeah, what a start for home consoles. It's just a below-average platformer and nothing all too special really. Then, in late 1992 and 1993, Timothy Dalton was still technically in line to play James Bond once more, and a game was made with him on the cover by the name James Bond The Duel for the Sega Master System, Sega Genesis, and Game Gear. I thought this one had some interesting ideas, as it's also a run-and-gun platformer where you fight classic villains like Oddjob, Jaws, Baron Samedi, and Mayday. But in the mid-90s, gaming advanced considerably. In 1994, Sony's PlayStation stormed onto the scene to introduce 3D gaming. The Nintendo 64 came out in 1996 to really show off what this could be like, with the introduction of Super Mario 64. It really was a huge deal at the time. But in 1995, development began for a game to be released alongside the new film of GoldenEye. Originally, the game was going to be a rail shooter with inspiration taken directly from the arcade game Virtua Cop. British developer Rare was given the task, led by a new up-and-comer named Martin Hollis, who had worked on a coin-operated version of Killer Instinct. Rare had developed a ton of games in their history, dating all the way back to 1986, with a few notable ones like Battletoads, Killer Instinct, RC Pro-Am, A Nightmare on Elm Street, a bunch of game show games like Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune, and of course, the 3 Donkey Kong Country games. They were a known name at the time for sure. But the gameplay of the game soon shifted to still be in the first person, but not a rail shooter. There were plenty of first-person shooters that existed before this, like Wolfenstein 3D, Doom, Duke Nukem, and Quake being the big-named ones. There were even a couple on the Nintendo 64 already of Doom 64 and Turok Dinosaur Hunter. So the goal here was to try and perfect this gameplay to give a top-tier experience, while sticking to the GoldenEye story. Because what those two N64 games did not have was a multiplayer setting to help utilize the 4 controller slots. So development for this game took quite a bit of time until it finally saw its release as a Nintendo 64 exclusive in August of 1997 in Japan and North America, and then in November in the UK, almost 2 years after the release of the GoldenEye film. In fact, the next Bond film of Tomorrow Never Dies came out in December of 1997, so this release was more in line with that film's release, which is probably some unfortunate timing back then. GoldenEye was old news, so surely this would be a dated and forgotten release, right? But as we all know, that is not what happened at all. GoldenEye 007 received critical acclaim across the board, became the multiplayer game to play at the time, ended up selling over 8 million copies, putting it as the 3rd best-selling Nintendo 64 game of all time, only behind the big heavies of Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64, and it is considered to be the grandfather of FPS games. GoldenEye was a pretty big deal then. As for my history with the game, I do remember seeing ads for it in some gaming magazines when I was 11. I could be wrong, but I think it was this very issue of Nintendo Power that my neighbor friend James brought over one day. Nintendo Power number 99 from August of 1997. This one was all about Star Fox 64 and Mischief Makers, and of course, the big upcoming release of Banjo-Kazooie. I can't wait to play Conker's Quest when it comes out too. Also, Yoshi's Island 64. But anyway, of course the big game featured here is GoldenEye, telling you what to do on each mission and even has these map layouts for each level. Really cool stuff. But James was so excited for this new game of GoldenEye, and I think he may have left the issue with me to look over. But my only reaction at the time was, yeah, I don't care about this in the slightest. A shooting game with James Bond? I obviously know of the character of James Bond, but I'd never seen any of the movies or anything. What's all this about Banjo-Kazooie though? I was mainly only into Mario and Zelda and Metroid and Castlevania. I did not share the same excitement he had, but he went out and bought it and he basically made me play it with him. And well, I thought it was actually kind of fun. We did get to play quite a bit of multiplayer with our little friend group, and I definitely had some fun with it, but never tried to seek it out for myself. Because of this, I remember him inviting me over to his house to watch the GoldenEye movie one day, and I did just that, making it my first experience seeing a James Bond movie. And I really didn't get much into it. Spy action movies really weren't my thing at the time, but it was kinda cool recognizing some of the locations from the game. And really, that was it for me for quite a while. It wouldn't be until like 2002 or 2003 when I started to get really into going to my local library to rent VHS tapes or maybe DVDs to watch some movies for free. I decided one day to give the James Bond movies a go, starting right at the very beginning with Dr. No, and I really had a lot of fun doing this. Over time, I started to love this series more and more, and it eventually became my favorite film series of all time. I've since seen every movie many times each. I have a Bond collection that I'm constantly adding to. I've read numerous books, I've played every video game and made that game retrospective for this channel. I went to a really awesome Bond exhibit in Chicago last year. I am absolutely a full-on Bond fan. And that all started with the Nintendo Power ad for GoldenEye 007 that I had no interest in. Oh, and I finally did get this copy of GoldenEye in like 2017. Yeah, it took me that long. So how exactly does it hold up today? Is it still worth playing given the countless first-person shooters we've had since its release, now about 28 years later at the time of me writing this? How good of an adaptation is it of the movie? Obviously there are going to be plenty of story moments changed to have this be in a video game medium, so I'll mostly just be pointing out these changes for fun, not necessarily as complaints. Well, it's time we examine this thing in detail and I'll give my general thoughts. And just like with the movie, I'll be going over everything, so even more spoilers here. But can you really spoil GoldenEye? I mean, I guess. But first, per tradition, we gotta check out the game box, of course. And I mean, it's a pretty classic box cover, although, yeah, it's kinda hard not to see the whole extended smile thing, if you know what I'm talking about. Pierce Brosnan's face in black and white looks pretty good here, but with the angle of his hand on the gun, the separation of his fingers just so happens to line up with the line of his mouth, so it can look a little goofy at first glance. But to his left is supposed to be Natalia, I think? It doesn't really look like Isabella Scorupco or Famke Janssen, but it's gotta be Natalia, right? Am I wrong in thinking that it doesn't look like her? Then at the bottom, we see Bond running away from an explosion, a helicopter on the right in front of an explosion, and 2 fighter jets flying over the satellite dish in Severnaya. Still, a pretty good cover, if only Bond's hand holding the gun was a tad lower. The back says, "You are Bond, James Bond. You are assigned to covert operations connected with the GoldenEye weapons satellite. M will brief you on your mission and objectives from London. Q Branch will support your efforts with a plentiful supply of weapons and gadgets. Moneypenny offers you lighthearted best wishes, and you're off. Your mission begins in the heavily guarded chemical warfare facility at the Bylamore Dam in the USSR. Look and shoot in any direction as you navigate 12 interactive 3D environments. Use stealth and force as you see fit in matters of international security. Consider the military personnel expendable. You are licensed to kill." And of course, there are some gameplay images to show that this is in the first person. So many different places to gun down soldiers. But as this blurb says here, highly intelligent enemies, so that's good to know. And since I've been playing this casually on my own N64, I'll be showing footage from World of Longplays. Alright, let's finally do this. Yeah, just a fantastic opening. Like any good Bond game, it has to start with the gun barrel sequence, and they did it just right here. Then we get a nice rockin' version of the Bond theme with their own little title sequence, just showing the character names and those sweet, sweet classic N64 models. Seeing everyone up close nowadays definitely looks super dated, but at the time, this was awesome. And in retrospect, I guess it would have been kinda cool to see a Nintendo 64 version of the movie's credit sequence with maybe an instrumental version of the GoldenEye theme, but also like music rights and stuff. Maybe it would have been a bit costly to pay Bono and the Edge or Tina Turner, so this does what it needs to do. You will not get me to say anything bad about the music and sound design in this. But getting into the game itself, the starting menu screen is very simple. Choose one of 4 game files and select single player missions or multiplayer. Going to Mission Select will open up a screen with 4 film reels with 5 spots each, totaling 20 levels. Each one will bring you to your classified documents with OHMSS at the top, or On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Then you select your difficulty between Agent as Easy Mode, Secret Agent as Normal Mode, or 00 Agent as Hard Mode. This does also matter for what you have to do to beat the level, as in most levels, Secret and 00 Agent will add objectives that you must do in order to succeed. Also, enemies will be harder to kill and will have better accuracy in 00 Agent especially. All of this helps to add replayability with the option of beating every level 3 times each. In selecting your difficulty, you are then told your objectives that you must do. It's up to you to figure out how you're supposed to do these, sometimes being up to trial and error. I think a lot of the fun of this game is honestly redoing a level when you fail. This is something I noticed while replaying it so recently. I don't always get frustrated when I die like I do in a lot of other games. I just start to think about what I can do better next time and go right back into it. Some of the later levels though, yeah, there are definitely some frustrations to be had. Each level also features some background which explains why you're in the area and what you'll be doing. You are given a briefing by M, an explanation of some gadgets and weapons you'll have with you by Q Branch with his usual snark, and then some words of encouragement and flirtation from Moneypenny. It's funny thinking back to my first time playing this. I had no idea who any of these people were. You never actually see M, Q, or Moneypenny in this game at all, so none of this mattered to me. What's an M briefing? Being a huge Bond fan now, it's kinda disappointing that you never do see them, but that's not what this game is about. This is all about getting you right into the action and figuring out some minor puzzles. You can read these to try and get some hints or game immersion, or you can just skip them entirely. Then you go right into the gameplay. Each level starts off with an establishing shot to show where you are, and then a panning camera eventually ending right into Bond's point of view. I actually do love this, as it starts off with a little cinematic effect before transitioning into video game mode. You are now in control of where Bond goes, and it's just a nice touch. And yeah, this is all in the first person perspective. You can move forward or backwards, strafe left and right, look up and down, or crouch, and movement feels so fluid. Keep in mind that there was absolutely nothing like this in any James Bond game up to this point. I mean, the last 2 games were James Bond Jr. and The Duel. This was massively innovative then. You always hear about games like Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time bringing Mario and Zelda from 2D to 3D, and really, this was no different. Your HUD screen is also very minimal to help you see as much of what's in front of you as possible. The bottom right corner has 2 numbers and a bullet symbol between them. The right number is how much ammo you have for the current weapon you have equipped, and the left number is how many bullets you have loaded at the moment. The only other thing on the screen is Bond's hand holding whichever gun you have out, and then an aiming reticle when you hold the aim button. And really, that's it. Super simple. If you get hit, your health screen will flash for a second. Pausing the game goes into a quick animation of Bond looking at his Q watch, which can also give you a bit of information. This is where you can see Bond's health, which is the orange to yellow meter on the left. The less color that is shown, the closer Bond is to dying. The right side acts as a secondary health meter if you pick up any body armor, as shown by a blue meter. The pause screen is also where you can change your weapons or gadgets, change the controller buttons, and see your objective list, and if you've completed any of them or not. You can also abort missions here too. And then, well, you play the game. Each level mostly plays the same as you move Bond through the level, figuring out how to complete your objectives and gun down hundreds and hundreds of soldiers. And that did kinda spark some criticism back in the day. Nowadays, first-person shooters are in absolute abundance with series like Call of Duty, Borderlands, Battlefield, Halo, Half-Life, I mean you name it. But in this 1997 game, you take control of James Bond and straight up murder dudes by the hundreds. Bond, of course, has a license to kill, so he certainly has killed people throughout the series, but it was never about gunning them down by the masses. Yet that is what this game is. Funny thing is, according to 007 Museum, GoldenEye has the highest death count by Bond of any of the movies, with 47 direct deaths caused by 007. It's really up to you whether you have a problem with it or not, even if you're looking at it as a Bond fan. But really, it's just what the genre of video game is. If you don't like guns or FPS games, then this is not the game for you. But back to the gameplay, there is somewhat of an auto-aim if you are just to shoot your weapon in the direction of an enemy, but it's not always perfect. But using the aiming reticle works only if you stand in place and hold down the aiming button, so you gotta weigh your pros and cons of when to aim or when to run and shoot. But now it's about time we go over every single level. Oh yes. We're gonna go all in on this video, but without going over every single objective in detail. I just kinda wanna talk about my general thoughts on them, where you are and what you do, and how strong or weak of an adaptation they are, and if I think these make sense in context. I definitely like some levels more than others, so here we go. Mission 1, Arkhangelsk, Part 1, Bylamor Dam. The game opens up in the same place as the movie does, the Bylamor Dam, which is actually located in Switzerland in real life, known as the Contra Dam. But here, it's above the chemical weapons facility in the USSR. And like in the movie, this is 9 years before the rest of the story takes place, so in 1986. As far as I can tell, Bylamor, if I'm saying that right, was made up here. And the game adds a little more to the level than Bond just running across the top of it in the movie. You do that here as well, with some extra stuff to do depending on your difficulty. On 00 Agent, Q has you intercepting data backup and installing a modem to track shipping contacts. Agent actually stays true to the movie though. Run to the bungee jump platform and dive off. That's it. It's kinda hard to analyze this level since it's just such an iconic opening to the game. Unless you want right into multiplayer, this is likely the first place you'll experience what this game has to offer. It's a solid opener that introduces a couple gun types here. Bond's standard PP7 with a silencer, the KF7 Soviet, an assault rifle with a slight zoom, a sniper rifle, and the DD4 Dostove, which I always thought was Dostoval due to the N64 graphics fuzziness. Not really a whole lot more to say about it though. It's a fun level to teach you how to play. Mission 1, Part 2, Chemical Warfare Facility Number 2. Arguably even more of an infamous level, the facility really is the level that I think of when I think of GoldenEye. And I think they really did a pretty great job making it feel like the place in the movie. You actually start in the bathroom ceiling and can see the dude in the stall just like Bond does. But instead of hovering upside down to punch the guy in the face, you now just, well, shoot him. Terrible way to go. But I think for me, this place probably feels like the closest adaptation in terms of the setting. You actually do make your way to the bottling room, meet 006, plant bombs to destroy them and all that. You were also told to minimize scientist casualties, which, I don't know, I mean they're in here working with the Soviet soldiers, so I guess you're supposed to minimize killing them because they're unarmed? Some of them actually aren't though and will pull out a gun if you provoke them. Either way, it's a real iconic level that amps up the difficulty from the dam, as there are more enemies to deal with in smaller corridors. You also learn about using switches to open doors and stuff here too. And come on, this is where you meet Dr. Doak. Who is Dr. Doak? He's just a guy who worked on the game that wanted to be in it, acting as the double agent among the scientists. Top tier Bond character. The weapons here pretty much remain the same, but you start the level with remote mines to blow up the canisters in the bottling room. You can also acquire hand grenades too. This is among the best levels in the game. Mission 1, Part 3, Runway. Here we're already halfway through the first reel of levels and we aren't even at the point of the title credits in the movie. The runway is indeed another locale from the film that they definitely tweaked to be in video game form. In the film, the runway is where Bond escapes the facility to grab a motorcycle before diving off to jump into the plane. Unfortunately, there are no motorcycles to ride here, but you can hop in a tank if you wish. This is the shortest level in the game though in terms of playtime and maybe size. There really isn't much to it at all. You can enter 2 buildings near the beginning and the rest is just the actual runway where you'll be continuously shot at. Your objectives here vary to finding the key for the plane and shooting and destroying a missile battery before taking off. Then you fly away from the stage in the plane rather than the crazy stunt from the movie. Being the shortest stage, it's just fine. If you aren't fast enough, this one can get rough on 00 Agent though, as enemies keep spawning. Weapons introduced here are the Clob, a machine gun that really isn't great, and timed mines, which look similar to remote mines, but they're, timed instead of detonated. Also the tank, of course. Mission 2, Severnaya, Part 1, Severnaya Installation, Siberian Plateau, also known as Surface. So it is at this point in the film where the credits sequence occurs and then Bond races with Xenia through Monaco and all that, but none of that is in this game. Instead, they really change up the story here, and Bond is the one in the tundra of Severnaya making his way into the bunker where Natalia and Boris work. Except Bond is never in Severnaya, so this is straight up added by the developers here. This apparently takes place 4 years ago, so in 1991 maybe? So we're technically not even into the story of the movie yet either. So as an adaptation, it's extremely poor. But as a video game level, yeah, I really like this stage. According to your briefing, there are increased levels of activity of a shipment of computer hardware sent here. M suspects that General Oromov could be behind it. And this place really does feel barren with all of the blinding white snow and somewhat creepy gray bodysuit enemies. The sky is kind of pinkish orange and cloudy. You hear wind all around you. The music feels cold. It's just a great snowy level, to be honest. Here, you can enter a handful of cabins and stands in the giant satellite dish. I feel like the main weapon associated with this place is the Clob, which I already said isn't great, but the enemies here use this thing constantly, so you're gonna acquire a lot of ammo for it. It's just so weak sounding and inaccurate. I think a lot of people dislike the Clob. You can also acquire a grenade launcher here, which is just as cool as it sounds. So you gotta power down the satellite dish and get the building plans for the nearby bunker. By the end of the level, you sneak into the bunker through a ventilation tower. This is actually among my favorite levels for the atmosphere. Mission 2, Part 2, Satellite Control Bunker. I think this is another really fun level, and again, Bond is never actually here in the movie, so this is completely made up for the game. This is the place where Boris and Natalia are introduced and Oromov and Xenia show up and gun everybody down, and that is absolutely not what happens here, although you do find Boris, just known as Programmer. Here, there are a ton of winding corridors and doors, and while it's not gigantic or anything, it can feel a bit like a maze. Guards are all over the place, there are security cameras and alarms that can go off, and it can turn chaotic pretty quick. In the main room is where you use your super cool 007 camera to photograph the main satellite screen, and even make a copy of the GoldenEye key. Then you just toss it to the ground like a gum wrapper. You would think, I don't know, taking the GoldenEye key with you would prevent a lot of destruction, but again, this is all made up for the game here. It's cool that you actually get to interact with it at all, I guess. Side note, I did see the actual GoldenEye key in real life, so there's a flex. This level just has a really fun spy feel to it by not getting caught by the cameras and sneaking around hallways and messing with computer stuff here. This is also one of the better levels in the game. Mission 3, Kyrgyzstan, Part 1, Soviet Missile Silo. This is the first level that was entirely made up for the game. You are now in Kyrgyzstan at a nuclear missile silo, now 2 years ago, so we are still not at the main story. And while Bond never goes to the Severnaya surface or bunker levels in the movie, they are at least places in the film. Here, this is entirely made up. In the background, it says, MI6 has become concerned that unscheduled test firings from a missile silo in Kyrgyzstan are being used to cover the launch of the GoldenEye weapons satellites. So you gotta plant some explosives to destroy the complex. This one can get pretty intense, especially on Secret or 00 Agent because there is a countdown timer. This is one of the more linear levels in the game too, as it follows a set path with a couple minor dead ends here or there. But this is one of the more dungeon crawly levels in the game too. You basically keep making your way up with twisting hallways and computer rooms with plenty of computer techie stuff to pick up, and scientists are all over. This is a hectic level where you are constantly looking for key cards from scientists in order to progress, and there are a ton of enemies around. On 00 Agent, you have to plant C4 bombs on top of that. At the very end, you actually get shot at by Oromov himself, but he takes off running. You actually can kill him here, but you aren't intended to, especially because it wouldn't make any sense for later in the game. Just a fun little tidbit there. Yeah, I think the silo is a pretty cool level, and it does have a dungeon feel to it as opposed to the other levels thus far. The facility is probably the closest in resemblance. It's not a top 3 favorite level or anything, but it's not bad. Mission 4, Monte Carlo, Part 1, Lafayette Frigate. We have finally reached the point in the story that's actually in the film. It's weird that the first 3 levels were all pretty decent adaptations, and then there were 3 more levels taking place between the opener at the events of the movie. But this is the frigate in the movie where the military demonstration is being unveiled for the Tiger helicopter before Oromov and Xenia steal it. It's also where Bond finds the admiral that Xenia murdered with her thighs. But almost none of that is even what happens here. In this version, you're way off coast in the Mediterranean Sea as opposed to the boat being docked. The helicopter demonstration has been postponed and you are tasked with saving a handful of hostages, being held at gunpoint, and disarming some bombs that were planted on computers. The background tells you that the Yanis group took hostages to assure that the pirate helicopter gets stolen. Yeah, it's called the Pirate here instead of the Tiger. You do place a tracker on the helicopter itself, and I always think it's funny to throw it right on the window where everybody can see it. Yeah, great spy work, James. This one can also get pretty frustrating, and I don't think I've ever been able to save every hostage on tougher difficulties. Whenever you appear in line of sight of the gunmen, you only have a couple seconds to attack them before they kill the hostage, and these corridors on the ship are pretty small. Some hostages are tougher to save than others. There are a couple decent submachine guns introduced here of the D5K Deutsch and the Phantom. They're a bit stronger and more accurate than the Soviet or the Klob. This is also not really a favorite level of mine, but it does mix things up a bit with hostages and bomb defusing. It's okay. Supposedly, you were supposed to encounter Xenia here, and Moneypenny even tells you to avoid her thighs of steel, but that was scrapped. You actually only see Xenia in 2 levels in the entire game, and it's not for quite a while. Mission 5, Severnaya, Part 1, Severnaya Installation, Siberian Plateau. Wait, were we already here? We're all of a sudden at a repeat level? Yeah, so not only does Bond never actually go to Severnaya in the film, you go to it in 4 levels in the game. The tracking bug on the helicopter landed here, which is what happens in the film. This time, M sends you back here to get evidence of Yanis's presence and destroy the helicopter discreetly. The surface this time has a bit of increased difficulty. It's a bit darker and harder to see with a dull red sky. It does feel a bit more sinister this time around. The gray suited enemies are stronger and more plentiful this time too. They can appear kind of out of nowhere. And on top of that, there are some security cameras in certain places and you really do not want to get seen by them. The Arctic commandos that appear are very difficult to deal with and they don't stop spawning. The regular enemies also continuously spawn, but at least they use the lame Klob. After destroying the helicopter, you simply waltz right on into the bunker and... oh no! Bond gets captured. I mean, what did he expect? Why not go through the ventilation shaft like before? This always felt weird to me. Unless he wanted to be captured. He does cross his arms like a complete Chad here too. Mission 5, Part 2, Severnaya Bunker Complex. Back-to-back returning locales. This time you are back in the control center bunker, and now you are a prisoner. And yeah, M is not happy that Bond got captured and even threatens him with a performance review, which makes this ending even stranger, honestly. But in the cell next to you is Natalia, whom you are meeting for the first time here, and we get our obligatory Bond, James Bond. Again, not at all what happens in the movie, so they took some liberties here. But in order to get out of this prison cell, you actually have to do a Bond thing and use one of your Q gadgets, this time the Watch Magnet Attract. Yeah, it's as simple as aiming at a clearly visible key right in front of you, so it's not like you have a big brain teaser here or anything. But what is cool here is that once you break out, you obviously don't have any weapons to take care of the immediate guard. Time to use those fists to slap chop him to the ground. Then you can acquire the Soviet and carry on with your mission, which is to basically explore and pick up some stuff laying around or in safes, and take out security cameras again. And also, not let Natalia die. It's much better to leave her as a prisoner while you clear out the bunker. The layout of the bunker this time is a bit different as you explore more of it. And I definitely say this one is tougher than your first trip here, but it is a lot of the same thing. This is the last of the returning levels as well. At the end, Bond and Natalia escape the bunker and run off into the Severnaya tundra to most certainly freeze to death. Mission 6, St. Petersburg, Part 1, Statue Park. The St. Petersburg Statue Park is another locale used right from the movie, and this is a fairly decent adaptation of it. In the film, this is where Bond makes Xenia take him to finally meet the leader of Yanis, who reveals himself here in the statue park, which is full of discarded Soviet Union statues and political figures. Bond learns that Alec Trevelyan is still alive and is actually the head of Yanis, who then knocks Bond out and ties up James and Natalia in the helicopter to blow itself up. In the game, you are here to explore the statue park in order to find Valentin Zhukovsky, who tells you Yanis is a traitor and will meet you at the statue of Lenin. The scene with Bond and Valentin in the bar was cut and was more streamlined here to have him actually be in the statue park instead. He's a bit more willing to help here right away as opposed to the Valentin in the movie too. I obviously had no idea who this person was my first time playing it or why he's here, but in your briefing it tells you that M arranged for this contact. After you do meet up with Yanis and discover that it's really 006, you get attacked by Yanis Special Forces who are wielding automatic shotguns, and are then timed with finding a passed out Natalia at the helicopter. Approaching her will wake her up and then the helicopter explodes. I like this level in the sense that they did a decent job replicating the look of the actual statue park located in Moscow. It's a unique looking place and I'm glad they included it here. You can get a little disoriented here navigating your way around, but it's not super complicated. At the end, you get captured by Defense Minister Mishkin. Mission 6, Part 2, Military Archives. We've made it to the third row of levels, and this is another pretty decent adaptation from the movie. This is where Bond and Natalia are being questioned by Mishkin before Ourumov storms in and kills Mishkin. Bond and Natalia make their way through the military archives here before Natalia gets taken by Ourumov. In this version, you are separated from Natalia and must find her, but I think they did a pretty good job with the look of this level. In my very recent playthrough, this was probably the most fun level for me. There are tons of guards and stacks of boxes laying around and doors and bookshelves and different levels to it, and it was just a ton of fun going through this one. You also have to actually find Mishkin here to speak with him before he leaves, so he actually survives in the game. You are also given the watch magnet attract at the beginning to help you take care of the two guards in your interrogation room, but I like just running up and slapping them. I was surprised at how much fun this level was. Mission 6, Part 3, Streets. And to contrast that, this is probably the first level in the game that I just don't care for. This is where the memorable tank scene takes place in the streets of St. Petersburg, where Bond gives chase to Ourumov, and once again captured Natalia. And I mean, you can replicate the scene in the game by using the tank, and you are timed in order to reach the end before Ourumov escapes, but you never actually see them. But the tank is entirely optional. Also, running over cars or mines will damage you. But I gotta say, the sound effect that plays when you run over the guards, I mean, oof. Pretty disgusting, but weirdly satisfying? Is that the word? You also have to minimize civilian casualties, which are just a handful of people running around aimlessly in the streets. It also differs here in the movie in that in harder difficulties, you have to go into a building to find Valentin again.
Me? Just hanging around.
Who somehow has his associates add time to your countdown. And while it's cool that they tried to replicate the tank chase, I just find this level to be pretty dull. It's all just so dark and drab looking, and even riding in the tank isn't all that fun. It can be tough to find cover to get past the lines of guards at street barricades, and some of them blast you with rocket launchers at a pretty fast pace. There's just something about this one that I never look forward to playing, but it has a different feel from the rest of the game, so I'll give it that. Mission 6, Part 4, Disused Military Depot. Similar to the silo level, this is another place made for the game here. According to the briefing, this is where the Yanis Operations Base is located, where they coordinate international terrorism and extortion, which is a pretty cool callback to Spectre.
Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, Extortion.
Here, you navigate a military depot with multiple hangars and railway stations to try and board Trevelyan's train at the end. In the film, Bond catches up to Ourumov and derails the train with the tank to rescue Natalia. So now they added on this whole train depot station where you can really take your time to get onto the train. Why aren't Ourumov and Alec just leaving right away? I don't know, but this can be a pretty fun level. It's kind of fun entering these hangars with pull-down doors, not knowing what will be inside. Some have nothing, some have body armor, one has an auto gun to shoot you down, and one is absolutely loaded with ammo. Going in these though will continuously spawn enemies throughout, so you gotta deal with a lot of dudes here. Q also tasks you with blowing up an arms cache. It's a fun level for sneaking around. Mission 6, Part 5, Converted Missile Train Heading East. Here we have a reimagining of Trevelyan's train from the movie. You make your way from the back to the front of the train, Snowpiercer style. This is the most linear and narrow level in the game, as each train car is either loaded with boxes or has rooms and bathrooms on both sides. It can get a little frustrating being attacked from behind, as sometimes enemies will appear from rooms that were locked. But you basically make your way toward the front train car by train car, taking out brakes before seeing the scene play out from the movie with Aramov having Natalia at gunpoint. You have to act fast before he executes her, and then use your watch laser on the locks on the floor to escape before the train explodes, while Natalia tries to track Boris's location. This is almost exactly how it plays out in the movie, so it's pretty cool to have that here. But man, this can be a tough level with how narrow the whole thing is. You can get some fun guns here though, like the ZMG, which I love using. It just sounds like it packs such a punch. Trains are part of multiple Bond films, so it definitely feels like Bond to have a level devoted to it here. This is also the first physical appearance of Xenia, but only for a brief second. Mission 7, Cuba, Part 1, Jungle. We are now at the third act of the movie, the Cuban jungle where Bond and Natalia discover Alec's secret base underneath the lake. But unlike the bright and sunny daylight here, this is a dark and foggy jungle setting. It's pretty obvious where the walls are here, so it never feels like an open jungle setting, but it's still a cool area for this era of gaming. There are tons of trees and ferns and animal sounds going on all around you, so there's still some immersion to be had. This is the point in the film where the missile shoots out of the lake to take down Bond's plane, and this level picks up right from where the plane crash lands. It's there where Xenia rappels down to try and squeeze Bond to death, and they do a different take here. When you approach the wooden bridge, out of nowhere, Xenia speaks to you and says, "This time, Mr. Bond, the pleasure will be all mine," and the boss fight commences. Xenia will approach you, double-wielding a grenade launcher and an RCP-90, but basically you just wait at the end of the bridge and blast her away when she appears. It's not really much of a boss fight, and it plays out way differently from the film. But Xenia will officially be gone, appearing in the game for a total of like 15 seconds. The fun part about this level is that the enemies here have AR-33 assault rifles, a stronger and better version of the Soviet with a better zoom. Also, Natalia will actually fight back alongside you, and she has a Cougar Magnum. That thing takes dudes out quick. This stage has a lot of drone guns and guys in camouflage, so you spend a lot of it inching along, looking for anything moving in the fog, since you can be caught off guard real quick. Toward the end of the level, you'll enter some caves, which I do like. This is a bit of a slow-moving stage, unless you know exactly where everything is. By the end, you reach an elevator to enter into the control center. Mission 7, Part 2, Yanis Control Center. Ugh, this place. This is the point in the movie where Bond and Natalia are inside the Yanis base, where Alec and Boris are trying to launch the GoldenEye satellite. But this level is pretty infamous for being extremely frustrating, and I'm fully on board with this. First, you have to secure the main area by taking out autoguns and guards. Then Natalia will open a door for you to secure another huge area, in which you have to use remote mines on armored mainframes, and that's all well and good. But oh man, once Natalia joins you in the main room, she will work on the computer to disable the GoldenEye, and trigger an alarm where guys will appear from all different parts of the room on 2 floors, or behind glass to shoot you and or her down. God, it can be so frustrating to get most of the way through this level just to have Natalia take a few strays and then it's all over. On 00 Agent, this level really sucks. It is kinda funny finding Boris though, who tries to pull a fast one on you by whipping out a gun just to either drop it or hand it right to you, and then runs away saying his "I am invincible" catchphrase. But no, not a fan of this level just because of the annoying protect Natalia part, although it can be suspenseful. But this one does have that sweet elevator music. Oh yeah. Mission 7, Part 3, Subterranean Caverns. The penultimate level takes place in the water caverns below the control center. This is definitely not in the movie, but you are still chasing Trevelyan through them before your confrontation on the giant antenna from the movie. Here, you are told to destroy the pumps that flood the underwater satellite and also contact Jack Wade to send in the cavalry. I believe this is the largest level in the game, and honestly, I kinda love it. First, you start with the ZMG, one of my favorite guns to use. There are these weird door types here, and each one leads to usually a handful of enemies as you progress through the caverns. Scientists are littered around, and they are some dumb folks, let me tell you. A couple objectives are to blow up computers that you come across, and you have to wait for scientists to not be near the explosions, as minimize scientist casualties makes its triumphant return. Sometimes they'll even run back towards an explosion. But I love the cavern area with the 2 floors with catwalks that wind around, and there are multiple ways to go and a secret passage. You can sneak around and take care of guys that you see above or below you on the catwalks, and it's just an all-around fun level. For it being the second to last level, I take this over the Control Center one any day. And the level ends with yet another elevator. Mission 7, Part 4, Antenna Cradle. The final level of the game, and it's time to take down that double-crossing 006. Like in the movie, this takes place on the giant antenna, so it's mostly all very narrow walkways. It's the reverse from the movie here, where in that, Alec was trying to stop Bond from disrupting the satellite, and here you are chasing Alec down. You will constantly be bombarded by dudes with body armor and 2 ZMGs, so this is a tough one enemy-wise. Alec will taunt you with lines from the movie like, "Always loyal to the mission, never to your friends," and "From the cradle to the grave, your grave, James." After dealing enough damage to him, he runs to the bottom of the antenna where the climax of the movie takes place. They exchange the famous last lines of, "For England, James? No, for me." Shoot Alec enough to win, Bond leaps onto the helicopter, and then the game is over. Roll credits to Bond and Natalia absolutely making out for minutes in the middle of the jungle to a seriously awesome end credits song. And that is GoldenEye 007, at least the main story. But that's not all we'll be talking about here, because there is still more to it. Firstly, each level has its own target time to complete it on a specific difficulty. If you finish the level successfully and under the allotted time, you can unlock cheats to really mess around with. There are so many wacky and fun things you can alter here, and some of them are pretty infamous. Some are pretty self-explanatory, like invincibility, all guns, infinite ammo, invisibility, and special guns you can start with. Paintball mode is always a fun one, where each bullet will produce a different color paint splash. DK mode is definitely the wackiest, where all the enemies have giant heads and arms to resemble Donkey Kong. Yeah, GoldenEye and Donkey Kong, what a pairing. You can play the levels in fast motion, in slow motion, you can have it so all of the enemies use rocket launchers. I mean, there can be some real zaniness here. But it's all your reward for getting better and better at playing through these stages. And the next thing to mention are those last 2 stages on the stage select screen. These are bonus levels that you must unlock, and they are a return to some classic 70s Bond films, which I think is awesome. Mission 8, Teotihuacan. Part 1, Aztec Complex. If you complete the whole game on Secret Agent difficulty, you will unlock the Aztec stage, and this one can be pretty brutal. This stage is based on the 1979 film Moonraker, which, in the film, deals with a billionaire space shuttle manufacturer by the name of Hugo Drax, who plans to straight up wipe out Earth's population and start over with what he deems to be a master race of people to live in space. It's definitely known as the Bond film that veers the most into Crazy Town, especially toward the end of the film with a literal battle in space of astronauts with lasers. For this level, you still look like Pierce Brosnan, but apparently this game did have plans to have the likeness for all the Bond actors at one point, but they couldn't make it happen. So I just pretend that I'm Roger Moore here. You are only given 2 objectives, reprogram shuttle guidance and launch shuttle. But easier said than done, because these enemies are incredibly accurate and tough to take down. But how cool is it that they actually look like Drax's lackeys from the end of Moonraker? I love it. They even recreated this large computer room, and I think it's just also such a nice touch. The 2 other things that this level is known for is that you can use the Moonraker laser, which has infinite ammo and can absolutely take dudes down real quick. To contrast that, it does a lot of damage to you as well. In descending a little further down in the complex, you will encounter Jaws himself, the hulking assassin with metal teeth played by Richard Kiel in The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. And man, he takes a lot of damage to take down and attacks you quick with his double assault rifles. This level is known for being probably the hardest one in the game, as you can get overwhelmed very quickly. But I just love that they adapted a Moonraker-centric level here out of nowhere. Reprogramming the shuttle can be a tad confusing, but once you do it, you get to see the Moonraker launch. Mission 9, El Sagira, Part 1, Egyptian Temple. To unlock this final bonus level, you must complete every other level on 00 Agent, including the Aztec Complex. But this is a real weird one, as it's combining elements from Roger Moore's first 3 Bond films, Live and Let Die from 1973, The Man with the Golden Gun from 1974, and The Spy Who Loved Me from 1977. I find it interesting that both bonus levels focus only on the Roger Moore era, and I think it's actually kinda cool. GoldenEye 007 is 90s Bond and 70s Bond. I'll let the background and M's briefing explain what's going on here though. Scaramanga has passed into legend as the deadliest assassin of all time. The current whereabouts of his golden gun are unknown. This is Sinister 007. We've received a message from someone claiming to be Baron Samedi, the voodoo sorcerer that you crossed swords with back in Haiti. He claims to have the golden gun and wants to meet you in the El Sagira Temple in the Valley of the Kings. Obviously it's a trap, but as a 00 agent, you know that goes with the territory. So if you know Bond lore, this is all sorts of wacky. Baron Samedi is part of actual Haitian voodoo lore and is portrayed as either immortal or a zombie. In Live and Let Die, he's played by Jeffrey Holder, and it's a bit nebulous as to whether or not he's a performer or the Baron Samedi in the film. He's not a huge part of the plot, but seen as more of a henchman character who Bond thinks he kills by pushing him into a coffin full of poisonous snakes. But the very last shot of the film has the Baron laughing on the back of the train Bond is on. The Man with the Golden Gun is all about an assassin named Francisco Scaramanga, played by Christopher Lee, who owns his own island near southeast China. Along with his sidekick Knick-Knack, he participates in a sort of duel to the death in a funhouse they've created there, where he has to locate and track down his golden gun to kill his opponent, hence the Man with the Golden Gun. His golden gun isn't a gun at first, but is pieced together with a cigarette case, a lighter, a fountain pen, and a cufflink that are combined into a gun. In The Spy Who Loved Me, Bond travels to Egypt early on in the plot to follow up on a lead where he encounters Jaws for the first time. There is a scene where he and Agent XXX get into an altercation with him at some Egyptian ruins. So this Egyptian level combines those 3 elements into one, where Baron Samedi wants to partake in a Scaramanga funhouse-style duel to the death to find the golden gun, but in the Egyptian ruins. And yeah, this level is super straightforward. There are also your regular enemies around, but basically you have to search the ruins for the golden gun and then find and shoot Baron Samedi with it 3 times and you win. Supposedly, his guns are enhanced with black magic and work differently each time you encounter him. When you kill him for the 3rd time, Bond walks away as it cuts to Baron Samedi creepily laughing to himself. It's such a weird level, but definitely stands out if you were able to unlock it, which is not easy to do. So that leaves one final aspect of the game and absolutely what it is most known for, the multiplayer. Funny enough, it's the part of the game that I have the least to say too, as it's pretty self-explanatory. Get 2 or 3 or 4 people, choose a level, weapon style, and rules, and then just try to kill each other. At the time, this was pretty remarkable, and this ended up being the multiplayer video game experience. So much fun can be had with this, with so many different customizable playstyles, and because the Nintendo 64 had 4 controller ports, you could have up to 4 people playing at the same time. I have some real fun memories of playing this with friends, and this is heavily what propelled this game into how successful it was. And funny enough, this element was apparently thrown on at the last minute too. There are eventually 11 different stages you can play on, right from the solo game, like the facility, the bunker, the caverns, and even the Aztec and Egyptian levels, and some newly created areas like the complex and caves. They implemented some classic Bond titles for settings like the Living Daylights for Flag Tag, You Only Live Twice where everybody has 2 lives, License to Kill for a one-hit kill mode, and The Man with the Golden Gun where everyone tries to find the one golden gun on the map to get points. I love these little homages paid to classic Bond here, awesome stuff. The last main thing to mention here are the wide variety of characters that can eventually be unlocked. Every single character model from the main game is here, but I think the return of some classic characters are what everybody remembers. There are the Moonraker Elite from the Aztec level, as well as Jaws and Baron Samedi from those bonus levels as well. but also the multiplayer-only editions of Odd Job from 1964's Goldfinger and Mayday from 1985's A View to a Kill. For whatever reason, Odd Job is notoriously short in this game, so a lot of players would enact a no Odd Job rule, since he is harder to hit in your regular line of sight. Harold Sakata, who played Odd Job, was 5'10", so I don't really know why he's so short in this game. In contrast, picking Jaws makes you much easier to hit, so it's kind of a self-penalty being him. It's also interesting to note that in James Bond: The Duel, these are the 4 characters that you have to fight against too. Anybody up for a rousing game of throwing knives only in the bunker? And well, that kind of exhaustively sums up GoldenEye 007. As I said, it was universally praised and gave hours of fun and probably frustration to many friend groups back in the day. But back to my main question, is it still fun to play today, now 28 years later? I mean, heck yeah it is. I was actually surprised at how much fun I was having going through the main game again. There was so much I didn't remember, so it even had an aura of being a fresh experience for me again. It didn't take long for me to get the hang of it, and I loved it. As for multiplayer, I can't really say. I did play it once for about an hour, maybe a year ago at a friend's house on the Switch Online version, but I was terrible. I really need to have that classic N64 controller to be any good, and maybe that's just me. I would love to play some classic 4-player GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64, just maybe on a larger TV. 4-player games can be fun, but man, those screens are tiny. As for the legacy of the game, Rare went on to develop a completely new story and concept, but retaining pretty much the exact same playstyle and engine in 2000 with Perfect Dark, also for the Nintendo 64, as well as a toned-down Game Boy Color release. Perfect Dark took many elements from GoldenEye, but ran with it in some way different directions. You play as Joanna Dark, this game's version of Bond. This game takes place in the not-so-distant future of 2023, that's funny, with futuristic dystopian elements, some dark science fiction, an interstellar war being between 2 alien races. I mean, it really goes for it. And I could not get enough of this game back then. Unlike GoldenEye, I did own Perfect Dark and claim to even like it more than GoldenEye. Keep in mind, I was not a Bond fan back in 2000, so this was more up my alley. Everything about it was an improvement for me over GoldenEye, especially with multiplayer, which had way more customizations. I of course played this with friends, but it was even fun playing multiplayer by yourself and having AI-controlled bots to fight against. It's been a very long time since I've played Perfect Dark, but I should give that a shot again soon too. The series went on to only have one more actual release in 2005 with Perfect Dark Zero for the Xbox 360. I have never played this. There was a remaster of the original game in 2010 for the Xbox 360, and apparently there is a reboot in the works too. Aside from Perfect Dark, the Time Splitters series was also known to spawn from GoldenEye and Perfect Dark, but I haven't personally played any of those myself. There are 3 games in that series released in 2000, 2002, and 2005. In 2004, EA developed a Bond game by the name of GoldenEye Rogue Agent for the GameCube, PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Nintendo DS, which I have of course already talked about in my video on that. This is a completely new story idea that has really nothing to do with GoldenEye, and you don't even play as James Bond. You play as an agent by the name of GoldenEye who lost his eye after being shot at by Dr. No and had it replaced by a cybernetic eye. They use a ton of characters and names from the Bond series here, but it's all absolutely in an alternate universe. It is still a first-person shooter, and while I haven't personally beaten the game myself, I got very close to the end in the one time I tried to beat it, and this was in like 2010. I remember liking it enough, but not loving it. It was cool to see what sort of characterization they would give to these known names and who would appear, but that was about it. I remember getting too frustrated with it toward the end and just gave up. In 2010, developer Eurocom released a full-on remake of GoldenEye for the Nintendo Wii and an alternate version for the DS. The intent here was to have a modern reimagining of the story, and since this was right in the middle of the Daniel Craig era, Bond's likeness was Craig instead of Brosnan. Even though I've gone on record in saying that Daniel Craig is my favorite James Bond, I was never on board with this change. GoldenEye is so much associated with Pierce Brosnan, that is just a weird change. But you know, rights stuff and all that. Also, this is meant to take place between Quantum of Solace and Skyfall, so this is not only a remake of the game, but the movie as well. To be honest, I only ever played a few levels of this for my review back in 2020, so I do not have much to say about it. Someday I'll give it a closer look, but as of now, my opinions on it are pretty non-existent. It also got yet another re-release in 2011 by the name GoldenEye 007 Reloaded for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. So there we have it. Everything I wanted to say about GoldenEye, which apparently was kind of a lot. After its original release, there were more than a dozen Bond games that came out, and none of them would ever quite capture the success and magic of GoldenEye. Some of them absolutely have a dedicated fanbase, with a lot of people really loving Nightfire and Everything or Nothing especially. But as of the time of me writing this, there has not been a James Bond video game since 2012's 007 Legends. That game was seen as such a failure that nobody has really wanted to attempt anything new since. Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough, and Quantum of Solace all had movie tie-in games, but that was it. Die Another Day and Skyfall were featured as levels in 007 Legends, and the first part of Quantum of Solace does integrate a lot of Casino Royale, but none of these were even as close as good as GoldenEye. Spectre and No Time to Die came and went with no video game releases. But there actually is a game that has been in development for over 4 years now by IO Interactive, but at the time of me writing this, there is still little information about it. We will just have to see what happens if and when it happens. As for now, I will once again ask if anybody wants to play Throwing Knives Only in the Bunker? Anybody? So thank you so much if you chose to indulge me on this one-off return to me talking about James Bond stuff. I know 98% of you come to this channel for Pokemon stuff, so I will absolutely be returning to that next. A huge Jaws-sized thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon people, with proper thanks at the end here. I'll see you all for some more Pokemon content. Paraspectre will return.